Welcome back to Hoochos. Today on Hoochos, we're going to be setting up and time-lapsing this. This is a Bato Bucket hydroponic system, and it's one of my favorite styles of hydroponic system that we've explored on the channel so far. We'll be discussing all of the elements that go into setting up and running this system. So in the description, there'll be timestamps so that you can skip backwards and forwards through the video to the parts that you're looking for. All right, let's get to setting up the system. So first things first, I've got to clean out the old systems so I've got space to put the new Bato Bucket system. So out with the old DIY Dutch bucket system and rain gutter grow system and in with the new. All right, now we've got some space to play with. We can go ahead and set up our buckets. I think we're going to need more fall on these pipes than I had obviously on the last system because all the buckets were level and the pipe fell at the front. But the way that these buckets are designed is that the pipe fits along the level of the bucket. So I'm going to probably have to make these systems slope down towards the res so that we can get some fall on those pipes. Okay, so for today's build, we'll be using some elbows to connect up our 40mm return pipe, which is the size pipe that you need for the overhang on the Bato buckets. Now these are the commercially available Bato buckets that you can get pretty much anywhere in the world, fairly cheap as well. You'll need some caps and adapters that work with that 40mm pipe that fits underneath those buckets. Depending on your arrangement in whatever space you've got, you'll need whatever fittings you need. I'm also going to use some 13mm poly pipe. This is going to be the feeder pipe, and off that we're going to be using some 4mm barbed elbows. And I'm not sure yet whether I'll use 4mm tube. I may, but if the nutrient solution runs well out of these, I'll just be using these. I'm going to lay out the buckets and then we can get our spacing for drilling the holes along our 40mm pipe. Now this is the 40mm pipe that I had pre-drilled for my other Dutch bucket system, and I'm probably going to run with this spacing at least for this side just so that I can utilize this pipe, and we'll see how the buckets look. I'm not particularly fussed about my spacing because my system isn't a commercial system and I'm not trying to squeeze out every last inch of space, even though I would like to use as much as I can. I am going to put them as close as possible because I'm going to have a range of different plants in this system, but you'll probably just want to space it appropriately for your plant type. I've removed all of the infrastructure that was in here, and the reason I've done that is because this side slopes perfectly for me. The whole greenhouse is on a slight slope, and that should return the nutrient solution back to my res in the manner that I want it to. So there's no need for me to use expensive wooden platforms to raise it up off the ground since the ground is already the perfect slope. So I'm going to lay out my buckets and then we can get to drilling the holes in the pipes. When you purchase these buckets, they'll come with net cups and a lid. This allows you to use them in a medialess system. So you would have media in the top to support the plants, and then you would have your feeder tubes coming into each of these net cups. Now, the reason I'm probably not going to go with this medialess approach is because it's really hot here and I don't want the root temperature getting too high. So the ambient air temperature, I think, will not necessarily be beneficial for this style of system. So I was actually given these by Rob, whose greenhouse we explored in a previous video, where he was growing tomatoes. And we were both worried when he first purchased the pots. He got them extremely cheap on Marketplace, and they were like $2 a pot or something. And we were worried that the color, this beige color, beige? Yeah, maybe, would allow too much light penetration through the sides of the walls. But he hasn't had a problem with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and use these buckets the way that they are, since he hasn't had any issues with his Bato buckets, and if I have any issues, I'll let you know though. So the assembly of these buckets is really simple. All you do is, without the lid and that cup, there's literally two pieces that make up the Bato buckets. You've got this style of fitting, and there's two of these with each bucket. So it just slots together like that, and then inside the bucket, this piece just fits in like so. And that is the simplicity of the Bato bucket. Let's see if I can show you how that works. So it fills up, and you can see that it started to drain out of the bucket, and intuitively it would stop like at the top of where the pipe is resting on the bucket. That is how the Bato bucket drains into the pipe below. So it'll fill from the top, and then it will drain through this outlet and into the base pipe. And that is the level of water that you'll have in the base of these Bato buckets. So I'm now just gonna set up all of the snorkels and lay them out. So the beauty of having the Dutch buckets on the ground is that I also get a lot more head height from the greenhouse because I'm not losing like that much on infrastructure. I'm underneath the buckets, which is also a bonus. I apologize for the state of me, but it's about 37 degrees Celsius and 100% humidity. So, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoons. It's just starting to cool down, and I actually had to call it quits for the middle of the day because it was so hot. I've decided to go with the spacing that's on my other pipe because it actually looks really neat, and I don't want to get too carried away with spacing them too close together because you just won't have any breathing room for the plants. And I can't really foresee me putting any plants in here that will take up less space than this. So this is 350 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and drill the holes in this pipe 350 millimeters apart, and that way I've got a nice consistent greenhouse. And at this point, a huge storm decided that it was the perfect time to hit. So grabbed the beer, and this was actually a precursor to what would be one of the biggest floods that our area had had in about 120 years. So little did I know while I was filming this that things were about to get extremely interesting in the area that we live. This is just the first happenings of what would be an interesting few weeks. So we've made it through the deluge. I've run all of the plumbing back to the res, and I'm using the old res for now. I do want to change that to a larger res because it's only about 40 liters in that res. I do have it topping up automatically, but we'll run through that when we do irrigation cycles. Let's fill up all the buckets with perlite so that we can plant our plants. Now we're not going to be putting any strainer bags or anything in these ones because I don't think we need to do it. It's just going to be an unnecessary cost. The way that I'm going to mitigate the perlite getting into the res and clogging up the pump is by adding one of these. This is a paint strainer. This is a pool filter strainer sock, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it around the end of my return pipe and zip tie it in place. Now this should catch any perlite that falls back through the pipes and into the res and stop it from clogging up the pump, and it will not block the return pipe. And that's a lot cheaper than putting a paint strainer bag in every single one of those buckets. I haven't tried this yet, but I do actually have a similar system on my house tanks on my return pipes from my gutters, so that I don't have to clean out the top filter basket all the time. It just catches all the grit at the end of my pipes, and that actually saves me having to clean out the baskets on the top of my tanks as much as usual. Okay, so I'm now just going to go along and fill these buckets up with perlite. Now this is a coarse grade of perlite, and this is the grade that I found works best for me in my Dutch buckets. Now I'm going to fill them right up to the top because I want as much root area as possible. So I'm not going to be stingy with this perlite. This looks more like a super coarse. I would ideally like this a little bit finer, but that's okay. I think it'll be fine. Fine. All right, so that was, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9.5. So I could probably get 10 out of each bag if I really wanted to. And that means it's about 10 litres per bucket. And I'll just fill up the rest. So my initial intention was to design and 3D print some clips to hold this 13mm irrigation pipe onto the back of the Dutch buckets, and that is still my intention, but I've run out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drill a hole in the back of each one of these Bato buckets so that we can zip tie the irrigation tube in place. And at this end one, I can just double it over and then zip tie it, and that will give us a seal at the end rather than purchasing an end cap. Okay, very good. This is called a punch spanner. Now, this is going to give you the perfect punch through your irrigation tubing. Now, you can just use anything with a sharp edge, but this is going to give you the perfect hole. So I'm just going to use that this time. And then I'm going to install these. These are 4mm barbed elbows, and I'm going to do one in each bucket for now. So I'm going to start with one per bucket because I'm going to have a lot more buckets than I was with my old system. So I'm just going to go along. So I'll just punch it with this and then add in barbed elbow. Ugh, it's actually the worst. I hate this job. Don't even bother doing it with your fingers, you'll just wreck your thumbs. So just straight in with some pliers or multi-grips. It's just 10 times easier, just like that. Okay, so I just turned on the float valve that goes from my reservoir to this reservoir. So that goes from my 1000 litre IBC with 2.4 strength diamond T at pH 6, and that's filling this up. Now, I'll leave that float valve run indefinitely. I'll explain this whole system a little bit later in the video. We're almost done. I'm running out of light here, but we'll have this planted today. So this is an assortment of different tomatoes. Tall ones at the back, beefsteak and black beauty. The medium-sized ones just down here are called yellow sweet, and at the front we've got some micro toms and black striped anthos. So I'm really interested to see how these ones perform, because I'm kind of sick of tying plants up, and I know the tall ones are going to be tall like the beefsteaks are going to be very large, but the micro toms are what I'm really interested in. There's multiple varieties, and some of them are called micro toms, some of them called dwarf tomatoes, but I'm just gonna stick them in. So I'll have the tall ones up this end. So I'll start with the beefsteaks at this end, and then I'll have the smaller ones up the other end so that I can make my way around the NFT. Might actually turn this irrigation on just to wet that perlite, and we can see how it works. So that's irrigating now, and it's shooting perfectly. That's actually going right at the tomato. I might have to show you tomorrow when there's a bit more light. But I'm gonna go ahead and plant all of these out. And we've got really nice pressure coming out of there. We've got pressure up the end here as well. Fantastic. There's no leaks. So I'm gonna go straight ahead and plant those. So we're now going to do a full time lapse of the Bato Bucket and the Wick Wedge hydroponic system. If you want to find out how to build the Wick Wedge hydroponic system, you can check out this video here. The basic design is a 3D printable wedge which fits within a rain gutter grow system with a float valve, tops up nutrients from below and feeds it into the bagged cocoa and allows the plants to absorb nutrients and water. After the time lapse, we're going to do a full rundown on irrigation cycles, media, and other factors you need to know in order to run the Bato Bucket hydroponic system. And will you have a look at those tomato plants? Both the systems, the Wick Wedge hydroponic system and the Bato Bucket hydroponic system, have been performing unbelievably. And by far my favorite plants are the micro toms, especially in the Wick Wedge hydroponic system where they've just exploded with fruit, and the beefsteaks in the Bato Bucket hydroponic system. I've been really impressed by the growth and the health of these plants, and that's testament to the hydroponic techniques at play here. So now I want to take you on a run through of the system, at which point we'll discuss the irrigation cycle times and alternative media that you can use instead of perlite, and what that means in the balancing of your irrigation cycles. So the basis of every hydroponic system is the nutrient solution. Now, this reservoir may seem deceivingly small, but the nutrient solution in this reservoir is continually topping up from this float valve here. Now, it tops up from my 1,000-litre res, which you can see over there in the corner, and that res is filled with 2.4 EC, pH between 5.5 and 6.5, and when the plants transpire, the reservoir's level drops and refills automatically from our IBC, replenishing the nutrients within this reservoir. This is how I get away with leaving this system for long periods of time without interfering with it. Throughout this grow, I've emptied this res twice, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. The way that this system works is that the pump at the bottom of the reservoir pumps nutrient up into this line. It runs through this tap, I'll explain these taps in a second, and up to the 4mm elbow barbs on top of the Bato buckets, feeding the top of the plants. The 4mm pipes then top up the nutrient solution available in our grow media, which is perlite in this case. And as the nutrient holding capacity of this perlite is filled, it starts to back up at the bottom and runs back down through this pipe all the way down to and back into our reservoir. As you can see here, our float valve is topping up because the plants have used some of the nutrient solution in the time that the pump's been off, and this is topping that nutrient solution back up to level. Here we have our pool filter sock, and as you can see, it's caught a little bit of the perlite that has risen up through our elbows in our buckets, but I haven't changed this the entire growth, and none of my 4mm elbows have clogged purely because I've got this filtration on my system. Now from time to time, you're going to want to change this reservoir because the plants will selectively remove nutrients from the nutrient solution. Even though you are filling up with full strength nutrient, the nutrients can build up over time. So the way that I've mitigated this with this system is I've added in another tap here, and we can just turn off our return tap and turn on this exit tap. That allows us to drain our res so that we don't have to physically manually drain it. We can let the pump do all the work for us. Okay, so let's quickly talk about pump sizing. The pump that I'm using is the AP 1050 water feature pump. Now the 1050 in the model number is the liters per hour when there's no head. This here is the AP 750 LV. That 750 is how many liters per hour it pumps when the water doesn't have to rise at all. The recommended head for this pump is 1 meter, but the flow rate at 1 meter is 400 liters per hour. So this pump here probably only has to lift half a meter, but the flow rate would be lower than the 1050 that it's rated for at 0 head. So depending on how high your pump has to raise water to meet your system is what you'll have to factor into your pump size. I would oversize my pump and I would go up to a 1000 liter or more per hour pump, just so that you have room for expansion in the future. Now, not all pumps are going to be equal, and it's really hard to give out advice on this matter because it really does depend. 1000 liters per hour is what I've got on this system, and it's working perfectly fine with one 4mm feeder on each of my 17 buckets. And I think I'd have plenty of room to expand my system using this pump. So I jumped onto CAD and designed a clip that holds a 13mm tube, irrigation tube or garden hose, to the back of the Bato buckets. So the way that this works is, as you can see, it just clips over the top of the corner of the Bato bucket. Now, if you don't want all of this algae building up on the top of your buckets, you can just run the 4mm pipe into just underneath the perlite and it will stop this surface bloom of algae. But as you can see, it's really just a surface bloom and doesn't really affect the plants at all. The reason I don't like using the zip ties is because it means that every time you change tomato plant and want to take this out, wash the perlite, you have to cut this zip tie and replace it. And that is just another unnecessary job. That was my major reason for designing this clip. So it just clips on the corner of the bucket. You just push it over like so, and it holds in place and won't move. And then this irrigation tube just clips in place like so. And that's not going anywhere. And if you have one of those on every bucket, that just means that this tubing won't move away and that pipe won't spill out and cause your reservoir to drain. So these will be available on my Patreon so that you can 3D print them yourself at home. $3 US, and it gives you access to all my previous prints, which there are many. So this 3D print actually does require support. There was no way that I could design it so that it was supportless, unfortunately. I'll show you what they look like to print. As you can see here, this is batch printing a bunch of them, and you can see they come out really nicely in batch print. So this will just allow you to print a heap off one time, and then you'll never have to worry about tying down 13mm tubing on your Bato buckets again. Here I have some examples of the grow media that are predominantly used in Bato Bucket hydroponic systems. All of these grow medias are inert. However, the cocoa is generally enriched with magnesium and calcium. The grow medias that I highly recommend are the perlite and the clay balls. The clay balls are almost infinitely reusable as long as you wash them. They have the lowest water holding capacity of all of these growing medias, so they will require almost constant irrigation, but we'll talk about irrigation in a second. The perlite will be reusable for an extended period of time, but you may get to a point where you find that you want to replace it. However, perlite is going to be the most budget-friendly option when it comes to reusability and initial outlay of cost. Vermiculite is another option. Generally, it will be mixed in with one of these other medias. It has a high CEC, which means cation exchange capacity. That essentially means that it holds on to nutrients and releases them when the plants need them, whereas the clay balls and the perlite have a low CEC. The problem with vermiculite is once it's wet, you cannot handle it. It loses its structure and it will degrade a lot faster than the perlite and especially than the clay balls. The cocoa peat has a high CEC as well, so it has a high cation exchange capacity, it holds on to nutrients and lets them go when the plants need them. However, it has probably the shortest shelf life of all of these. It is also probably best to mix your cocoa with something like perlite to give it more aeration. And that's another reason that I would recommend using perlite or clay balls. These are going to supply the most amount of oxygen to the roots, which will allow the roots to respire and allow the plants to fully absorb the nutrient solution that you're delivering in your irrigation cycles. And that brings me to what is bound to be the most controversial topic of this video. Now, I would love to hear about your irrigation cycle and whether or not it exists, whether you just run it full time. The reason being is there is almost no information, peer-reviewed studies on irrigation cycles that I could find freely available to the public. So with this in mind, I'll be working from this paper. This peer-reviewed study, Irrigation Dose According to Substrate Characteristics in Hydroponic Systems, was one of the best articles I could find that hinted towards the appropriate irrigation cycles for your Bato Bucket hydroponic system. Okay, so Hooch, what is the best irrigation cycle? As usual, the answer is, it depends. It depends on your substrate, it depends on your climate, it depends on your environment, it depends on the plants that you're growing. So this journal article summarizes that we can come up with the perfect irrigation cycle if we tailor it to our media. So with our fast draining media, our irrigation cycle will have to be more often. And with our slow draining media, like our cocoa and our vermiculite, our irrigation cycle will have to be less frequent. The article also states that if the irrigation cycle on our Bato buckets are too little, it will actually cause a buildup of salts in the root zone. So we are aiming for, in a recirculating system like this, at least 50% runoff. Realistically, what the paper's saying is that you can't actually water too much. However, I would argue that to get optimum oxygenation levels, we would stop the irrigation cycle at least 3 times a day to allow all of the water and nutrients to drain out of the materials and replenish it with fresh air. Now, in those breaks in irrigation, the roots will actually absorb more water and force more air into exactly where the root zone is and where the oxygen is needed. Now, the obvious benefit to running your Dutch buckets 24/7 is a lack of wear on the pump itself. Turning on and off isn't great for pumps. However, I'd argue that the added oxygenation from letting the buckets drain a few times a day is well worth the little bit of wear that may occur on your pump. If you are running your Bato buckets or Dutch buckets with a permanent irrigation cycle, that is absolutely fine. I don't think that you'll suffer any extremely noticeable adverse effects. With that turnover of nutrient solution, I feel like the water will be oxygenated enough. So if you prefer to run your pump 24/7 or don't have access to a timer, running the pump permanently on is a perfectly fine irrigation choice. So just to give you an example of another hydroponics YouTuber with a wealth of experience with Bato Bucket and Dutch Bucket hydroponic systems, MHP Gardner states that he runs his irrigation cycles for 30 minutes 3 times a day and 45 minutes to an hour 3 times a day in the summer. So enough talking about irrigation cycles. What's my irrigation cycle? Well, I actually have a mechanical timer on my pump and it looks like this. So as you can see, I haven't even adjusted my irrigation cycle based on the day and night, which I actually think you should probably do. I have this running for 15 minutes every 4 hours. So that is the irrigation cycle that produced these results. Now, 15 minutes every 4 hours has produced these results, and I believe that's because the plants are getting adequate nutrients. They're getting a break in the feeding of nutrients, which allows the plants to absorb the nutrient solution as well as the buckets to drain. And once every 4 hours, it's getting a top up for 15 minutes through a 4mm tube, and it's giving the buckets at least 50% runoff of nutrient solution, replenishing with fresh nutrient and washing out any salts that have built up in the Bato buckets themselves. But as I highlighted earlier, you would need to change this irrigation style depending on the media that you're using. If you were using cocoa, I would recommend irrigating at most 3 times a day, as it holds onto water really well, and to allow it to dry the appropriate amount to oxygenate it once again, you're going to want those less frequent irrigations. And then the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're using clay balls, you're probably going to need to irrigate a lot more often than my once every 4 hours. Now, having outlined all of that, I was very hesitant to give out a rigid irrigation cycle because I know that some people will just go and implement that, and it is not black and white. It's nuanced and it depends on a variety of factors like your environment, your growing media, your system design, even something as small as the nozzle diameter and how much nutrients being delivered. So please take these factors into consideration. And if you're irrigating in another style that's working, that you're happy with, don't change it. Please do let me know in the comments what your irrigation cycle is. I'd be extremely interested to see, and maybe we can have a follow-up video where I outline all of the different techniques that you guys have. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Hoochos. Happy hydroponicking, and I'll see you next time on Hoochos.